Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Chapter 1. My story begins. He is out there, in the ocean. But he is here, too, in my dreams, always in my dreams. He will never leave me. He is whiter than the first beautiful snow in winter, whiter than the stars in the sky on a warm summer's night. But he brings only death. He is Moby Dick, the white whale. My name is Ishmael, and this is my story. I'm a sailor, and I work on different ships. I love my life on the ocean. It's sometimes dangerous, but never boring. I feel sad when I'm not on a ship. One November day, I thought, I want to work on a whaling ship. Why did I want to be a whaler? I can't tell you. The life of a whaler is very dangerous. The men are away from their homes and families for years. Many never come back. Their wives wait at home. They stand and look at the ocean with sad eyes. But I wanted to visit exciting new places, and I wanted to see the whales. The first American whalers sailed from the town of Nantucket, so I went there too. I arrived on a cold, dark night and looked for a room. I was tired, so I went into the first place. The men inside drank and talked loudly. A large man with a red face stood behind the bar. "Do you have a room for tonight?" I asked him. "Our rooms are full," he said. "The men are here for the whaling ships. I'll have to put you in a room with Queequeg." Then he smiled and looked around at the other men. "Who's Queequeg? Where is he?" I asked. "Oh, he's a whaler. He's out now, but he'll be back later," said the man. Then he smiled again, and the other men laughed loudly. I didn't understand, but I was very tired. So I went to the room and got into bed. I fell asleep very quickly. A noise outside the door woke me up. I opened my eyes, but I didn't speak. The door opened, and a man came in. It was dark, so I couldn't see him well. Then he lit a fire in the fireplace. When I saw him in the light of the fire, I sat up. He was a huge man and very, very ugly. He had black lines over his face and body, and almost no hair on his head. He wore a strange skirt and no other clothes. The huge man suddenly jumped onto my bed. "Help!" I shouted. "Help!" The barman ran in. "Stop, Queequeg. This man wants a bed for tonight. He's sleeping here." Then he turned to me. "This is Queequeg, the finest whaler on the ocean. Don't be afraid. He won't hurt you." He laughed and left us. After he left, we were very quiet. "I'm sorry," I said. "I too," Queequeg said. His English was slow and careful. We began to talk, and then we couldn't stop. Queequeg listened to my life story, and I listened to his. He came from Kokovoko, a long way away in the Pacific Ocean. He had a good life because his father was an important man. But Queequeg wanted to see the world, so he left his home and sailed away in his small boat. A whaling ship found him and gave him work. Queequeg was strong and quick, so he was a fine whaler now. He never went home. When the morning came, we were great friends. Queequeg stood up and shouted, "You will find us a whaling ship today. You and I will sail around the world." And do you know something? He was right. Queequeg knew because he could see the future. I learned this later. He was a strange and wonderful new friend. Chapter 2. We find our ship. That morning, I looked around Nantucket for a good whaling ship. I stopped looking when I saw the Pequod. It was tall and strong. Its wood was dark from many years on the wild oceans. I went onto the ship. A man sat at a table with a big book in front of him. He wore a long black coat and a big black hat. He didn't smile. "This is a fine ship, and I want to go whaling with you. Where do I write my name, Captain?" I asked happily. "I'm not the captain. Captain Ahab is sick. He's down below. I'm Starbuck. Are you a whaler?" he asked. "No, but I'm a good sailor," I answered. "You can ask the captains of my other ships." "I'm not interested in your captains and your ships," he said. "Sailing is not whaling. Whaling is a hard life. You'll be away from home for many years. The work is difficult. You have to be strong and fast, and it's very dangerous." "I want to learn, and I want to see the world," I said. "Oh, you'll see the world, and you'll see more, good and bad. Some very bad things." He looked at me for a minute. Then he spoke again. "I'll tell you about whaling. Captain Ahab has only one leg. And do you know why? Because a whale took his other leg. A huge whale took it off." I said nothing. What could I say? "So, you want to be a whaler on Captain Ahab's ship? Can you look into the eye of a whale? Can you stand in front of its huge mouth and throw your harpoon?" "I can, and I will," I shouted. "I'm not afraid. I'm a good sailor. You'll see. This is my life, and I—" He stopped me and turned the big book around. "Write your name here," he said. His eyes were tired. "Thank you. You won't be sorry," I said. "Don't forget my words," he answered. "I have a friend. He's a good whaler," I said. "We'll see. Bring him tomorrow," said Starbuck. Queequeg and I went to the Pequod the next day. The men on the ship laughed at this huge, ugly man. Queequeg didn't say anything. He looked down at the water from the ship. Then he turned and spoke to the men. "Do you see that bird?" he asked. The men looked, but they couldn't see anything. "There," said Queequeg. The men looked carefully this time and saw a small dead bird a long way away on the water. "That bird is a whale's eye," said Queequeg. He threw his harpoon and hit the bird. "Now that whale is dead," he said. The men were quiet. Queequeg was better than every other man on that ship. And so the Pequod had 2 new whalers. We went to our room and got our things. An old man stopped us on the street before we got back to the Pequod.
"Are you sailing with Captain Ahab? Do you know him?"
he asked. "Yes, we're sailing with him. He's sick now, but we'll meet him later," I answered.
"Sick!" he shouted. "Yes, he's a sick man. He's the devil."
"And who are you?" I asked.
"I'm Elijah,"
he answered. "Why do you say this about Captain Ahab? Men say that he's a good whaler. He knows the ocean."
"They're right,"
answered the man quietly. Then his eyes turned big and wild.
"But he's the devil. I sailed with him. I know, and his men are the devil's helpers."
He looked at me strangely.
"He only has 1 leg. Do you know Captain Ahab's story?"
I suddenly felt afraid. "Of course we do," I said. I turned to Queequeg. "Come, my friend," I said. "Let's leave this crazy old man." And we went quickly to the ship. We sailed on Christmas morning. Captain Ahab didn't come up and meet the whalers, but every night we heard him. He walked up and down, up and down. One night we heard Starbuck speak. "Please, Captain, stop. You're waking your men up."
"No, I can't sleep, so my men won't sleep. They can think of whales in their beds, dead whales. That's their job," shouted Captain Ahab.
I thought of Elijah's words. The devil's helpers. Were the men on the Pequod devils? There was unhappy Starbuck. Then there was Stubb. He was very different. He always laughed and told funny stories. From my bed, I looked around at my neighbors. Bildad, Tashtego, Dagu, Flask, Manxman, and the other whalers. They were from many different countries and had interesting stories. They weren't all good men, but they weren't devils. Who were Captain Ahab's devils? Chapter 3. Captain Ahab's Story. For 3 weeks, Captain Ahab stayed below. Then one day, suddenly, he was there in front of us. He was a thin man, but he was strong. He had a hard face with lines on it from years of sun and wind. His hair was gray and wild. His clothes were black. Then I saw it, his white whalebone leg, and an ugly white line ran down from the top of his head. Did it go down to his feet? Who or what did that to him? What fight did he lose so badly? He stood and looked at us with angry eyes.
"What do you do when you see a whale?"
he suddenly shouted.
"Shout, sir,"
answered the men.
"Good. Look at this."
He showed us some gold.
"I want 1 whale. A white whale. One of you will see this whale first. That man will get this gold."
We stood quietly. Whalers don't make much money. We thought about the gold. We could buy a lot of nice things with it.
"You'll know him when you see him," said Captain Ahab. "He's the biggest whale in the oceans."
"I saw this whale," said Queequeg to me. He is a mountain. Very big. Very strong. I put my harpoon in him. He got away.
I have to find this whale. I will find him, shouted Captain Ahab.
Are you talking about Moby Dick? Asked Testego.
Yes, answered Captain Ahab.
Moby Dick took your leg, said Starbuck quietly. Captain Ahab shouted angrily at Starbuck.
Yes, he took my leg. He took half of me. Now I'm half a man, and Moby Dick will pay for this. I'll follow him to South America, to Africa. I'll follow him to the end of this world. I'll see him dead.
He turned to the other whalers.
Are you with me, men?
Yes, they shouted. They were excited. They saw the gold. They shouted and laughed. Only Starbuck stood quietly. His face was as dark as the sky before it rains.
What's your problem?
Captain Ahab asked him angrily. Then he smiled.
It's too dangerous. Is that the problem?
I'm not afraid of dangerous work, answered Starbuck. But I work for whale oil. I fight whales for their oil, for money. You hate this whale. How much oil will that bring you? How much money?
When I kill Moby Dick, I'll be rich in here,
shouted Captain Ahab, and he hit his body with his hand. He turned and started to walk away.
Are you going to follow this animal because it won a fight with you? It's wrong. It's crazy, shouted Starbuck.
When he heard this, Captain Ahab turned on his whalebone leg. He was very angry now, and he shouted in Starbuck's face.
This whale is evil. Do you understand? White is the color of ice, and ice takes strong ships down under the water. White is the color of a man's eyes when he can't see. White is the color of dead men. White is evil, and this whale is evil. He's laughing at me. I'll only be free when this evil is dead. Dead.
The color left Starbuck's face. He was the loser of this fight, and Captain Ahab knew it. He turned to the men again.
Drink! Death to Moby Dick!
He shouted. The men put their harpoons up high and shouted too. Then they drank and danced. Later that same night, the men were asleep and the ship was quiet. I was outside with Pip, the little cook boy. We had to put water out for the next day's whaling. Listen, said Pip. Can you hear that? I hear men. The whalers were at the other end of the ship. There was nobody there. I don't hear anything, I said. No, listen, said Pip. There are men below us, 5 or 6 of them. Can't you hear them? It's the ocean, Pip. It's playing games with you, I answered. I have good ears, said Pip. He was angry with me and walked away. I watched him go. Then I sat and looked up at the stars. I dreamed of the white whale. I dreamed of gold. Chapter 4. Our first whale.
Whale!
Shouted Tashtego from the top of the ship.
Whale!
Captain Ahab came quickly.
"Get the boats!"
he shouted. The whale sent a shower of water up into the sky. Suddenly, 5 men came up from below and stood by Captain Ahab. Their faces were dark, and they had long, black hair. They wore strange white pants and no shirts or shoes. One of the men was older. He was darker and only had 1 tooth. He wore a strange white hat, so we couldn't see his hair. His black eyes looked only at Captain Ahab. These were Captain Ahab's devils.
"Fedallah, go!"
Captain Ahab shouted to this man. 3 small boats went down into the water. Captain Ahab's men came too, in their boat. His men were strong, and their boat quickly sailed in front of ours. I turned to Pip. "I understand now. These are the men. You heard them speaking before."
"I told you,"
Pip shouted back.
"Stop talking and row,"
shouted Stubb from the back.
"Do you think this is a tea party?"
Stubb always shouted at us, but we were never afraid of him. He always had a smile on his face. Starbuck was the captain of our small boat. He didn't talk to us, but we heard him say quietly, "Who are those men? What's Captain Ahab doing?" Captain Ahab shouted to his boat from the Pequod, but his men only had ears for Fedallah. Their eyes never left Fedallah's face, and their boat went faster and faster. This was my first whale. Maybe we'll kill it, I thought. I was excited. Every whaler was excited. But why weren't we afraid? Because our heads were full of money, oil, gold. The sky suddenly turned dark with rain, but we didn't go back. "We have time. We can kill a whale before the heavy rain comes," said Starbuck. Queequeg stood ready with his harpoon in the front of our boat. Suddenly, the whale was there again. It came up out of the water, under our boat. Men and harpoons went everywhere. Then the heavy rain came. In minutes, our boat was full of water. Strong winds took our sails down. The whale left us and swam down into the dark water. After some time, the wind stopped. We waited, and day turned to night. We couldn't see anything. Where were we? Where were the other boats? The men weren't angry with Starbuck. The weather can play games with the best sailors. More hours came and went. We were wet, tired, and afraid. Then we saw a large black thing in the water. Was it the whale again? No. It was the Pequod, but the men couldn't see us.
"It's gonna hit us,"
shouted Stubb. We jumped into the ocean and began to shout for help. When the men on the Pequod heard us, they put ropes down. Then they helped us onto the ship. The other men were there, Captain Ahab's men too. They turned back when they didn't see the white whale. Chapter 5. The Albatross and the Samuel Enderby. We fought and killed many whales after that first night, but our work didn't finish when we killed them. We then had to climb down onto the dead whale and cut off the fat. We had to work quickly because sharks came for the whale meat. Sharks could eat a whale in one night, and some of these whales were almost as big as our ship. We cut off large squares of fat and pulled these squares onto the ship. This was a long, hard job. It was also dangerous because sharks swam around us. We then cooked the fat and made oil. When the oil was ready, we put it into barrels. Oil gave us light and made us warm. We could sell it to people around the world. Oil was our money. But did this make Captain Ahab happy? No. The money wasn't important to him. He only thought about Moby Dick. He could only hate. He stood for hours on the ship, in the rain, in the snow, and looked at the ocean. When other ships went past, he didn't ask them, "How are you? Do you want help?" He only asked, "Did you see the white whale?" One day we met the albatross. It was on its trip home after 4 long years on the ocean. The ship and its whalers looked ready for home. The men were tired and thin, with large, hungry eyes. The wind was strong that day, so the albatross couldn't come near us. But the captain put his hand up and smiled. Captain Ahab shouted from the Pequod, "Did you see the white whale?" The captain shouted his answer, but the wind carried his words away. Captain Ahab put his hand behind his ear, but he couldn't hear the captain. "This wind!" he shouted. "Listen, tell people at home, we're sailing around the world. We'll bring back the teeth of the devil whale." Starbuck stood and watched Captain Ahab. "Is he forgetting his wife and child at home?" he said to me. "Wife and child?" I asked. Did Captain Ahab really have a family? "Oh, yes. His family is waiting for him," said Starbuck. "And my family is waiting for me. Every day my wife, Mary, takes our son to the beach. They look at the ocean. They hope that they'll see our sails one day." I thought about the other men on our ship. How many of these men had families? What did they leave behind them when they went on the whaling ships? Who waited for them? Nobody's waiting for me, I thought. I want a wife and child. I'd like to go home to them. Day after day, nothing changed. Captain Ahab always asked other ships about the white whale. Some captains knew about Moby Dick. Some laughed at Captain Ahab. "Moby Dick is only a whaler's story, nothing more," they said. Then one day, we met the Samuel Enderby. The ocean was quiet, and the captain, Captain Boomer, came onto our ship. He was a friendly man and smiled at us. He only had one arm. "Did Moby Dick take your arm?" Captain Ahab asked excitedly. "Yes, I lost my arm to the white whale," the captain answered. Captain Ahab's face lit up. He was happy. "Come with me. The white devil will pay for your arm and my leg," he shouted happily. "Oh, no, I can't do that," the captain answered. "One arm is better than no arms or legs. I want my life. I think I'll leave Moby Dick in the ocean." "Leave him?" shouted Captain Ahab. He turned his back to Captain Boomer for a minute. Then he turned around and shouted at him. "Get off my ship! You're afraid. I'm not afraid. I'll find Moby Dick. I'll look him in the eye. I'll kill him." The smile left Captain Boomer's face. "I hope, for you and for your men, that you never find Moby Dick." And without another word, he left our ship. Chapter 6. Moby Dick. Captain Ahab didn't sleep very often now. We saw the light from his room on many nights. He sat at his table. He looked at his maps and planned. Where was Moby Dick? How could we find him? He only talked to Fedallah. We could hear the two men in Captain Ahab's room. Captain Ahab often shouted angrily, but Fedallah always spoke quietly. Fedallah was different from other men. He stayed away from the other whalers. He sat high up in the sails at night and watched for whales. He slept in the day. Why does he watch for whales at night? We asked. Does he have the eyes of a cat? Can he see in the dark? And why did Captain Ahab only listen to this man? Fedallah wasn't God. He can see the future, said some whalers. Could Fedallah really see the future? What did he see? What did he tell Captain Ahab? One night, Starbuck found Captain Ahab asleep at his table, with the light on and his maps around him. Crazy old man, he said quietly. You sleep tonight, but your dreams are full of your white whale. You hate Moby Dick, and you're taking me and our men with you. To what? Our deaths? That same night, we heard Fedallah. The white whale! He shouted. I ran and woke the other men. We looked up and saw Fedallah at the top of the sails. He looked out at the ocean and showed us the whale. There! He shouted. Suddenly, a huge shower of water went up. Then a second shower. We could see something white on the water. It was a white whale. Was it Captain Ahab's white whale? Now we understood. Fedallah watched at night because you could see a white whale at night. Captain Ahab was there. His face was as happy as a child's face on Christmas morning. Put the sails up! Faster! He shouted. The white whale sent 3 more showers of water high up into the sky. The water looked beautiful in the light of the stars. Follow him! Shouted Captain Ahab. We started to go after the whale, but it quickly swam under the water. We lost it. Was that really Moby Dick? I asked Queequeg. Will we see him again? Queequeg cleaned his harpoon and looked at the ocean. He will come again, he said. And he did. He came the next night, and the night after that, always at the same time. He wants me to follow him, said Captain Ahab on the 3rd night. He's showing us the way. I was suddenly very afraid. We had to stay with Captain Ahab to the end. We couldn't leave. I couldn't change my future now. Chapter 7. Pip's Story. You met our cook's boy, Pip, earlier in my story. Pip was a young black American boy. He was only 14. A whaling ship wasn't a nice place for a boy, but Pip liked his work. He sang in the kitchen when he helped the cook, but things changed for him. After many weeks, we lost Moby Dick, and we started to look for other whales again. One of Stubb's men broke his arm, so he couldn't row. Stubb put Pip in our boat on the next whaling trip because there was no other man. Pip didn't want to go. We could see that in his face. But he always wanted to help, so he went quietly. Our first trip was fine, and Pip felt happier at the end of it. On our second trip, Tashtego's harpoon hit a whale behind its eye. The angry whale turned around and hit the boat. Pip jumped up and then out of the boat. When he jumped, the harpoon rope caught him. The whale started to swim away fast. It pulled Pip behind it. We could see Pip's head go in and out of the water.
"Stupid boy!"
shouted Tashtego. He stood up with his knife. He could cut the rope and free the boy. He looked at Stubb. Stubb liked the boy, but he didn't want to lose the whale.
"Cut the rope!"
shouted Starbuck angrily. Tashtego cut the rope and the whale swam away. They pulled Pip back into the boat. The men were very angry with him.
"Never jump out of the boat again," said Stubb. "We'll have to leave you. Who will bring us more money, you or a whale?"
On the third trip, Pip jumped again when a whale hit the boat. He was a young boy, a cook, not a whaler. He was afraid. This time, Stubb left him in the ocean. "Please, come back," Pip shouted. "Please don't leave me. The sharks will eat me." But the boat went after the whale. Pip was in the ocean for a long time. The water was as cold as ice, and Pip was afraid. The ocean was very dangerous. Stubb sent the Pequod for him after we got our whale. When Pip climbed the rope, Captain Ahab put out his hand to him. Pip was a little crazy now. When he saw Captain Ahab's hand, he saw the hand of God. "Thank you, God," he cried. After that day, Pip was a different person. He followed Captain Ahab everywhere. He was always with him. And Captain Ahab was a different man when he was with Pip. He never shouted at him. He smiled and was kind to him. After many days of this, Starbuck got angry and shouted at Pip.
"Captain Ahab is not God. Stop following him, you crazy boy."
"Why are you angry? The boy doesn't understand," I said to Starbuck.
"I'm not angry. I'm afraid. I know the boy is crazy. But Captain Ahab, does he think he's God? Is he—"
He stopped before he said the word crazy.
"This is not good. It's wrong," said Starbuck.
Then he walked away.